All right, let's dive in. Looks like you've given us quite a bit on Black Swan events with Nassim Nicholas Taleb's The Black Swan as the kind of the centerpiece. So you're looking to understand how these massive, unpredictable events really shape our world. And we've got some other excerpts in the mix too, which is awesome. We'll be sure to weave those in.
Yeah, from what I see, you're interested in not just what these black swans are, but also how they impact us and, well, what we can actually do about them.
Exactly. Okay, so first things first, in Taleb's view, what exactly is a black swan?
He breaks it down with three characteristics. First off, it's got to be unpredictable, like nobody sees it coming. Second, it has a huge impact, really rocks the boat. And third, after it does happen, well, we try to explain it away, and make it seem less random than it really was.
So, like, think about the crazy success of Google back in the day. Who could have predicted that? Or even 9/11, a true world-shaping event, and then we spent years trying to make sense of it. Taleb even talks about these black swans happening in our own lives too, right?
Absolutely. Think about it, maybe a sudden layoff that reshapes your entire career or an investment that takes off unexpectedly. Those are your personal black swans. So this makes me wonder, are you dealing with a high-stakes decision right now, or just trying to wrap your head around a world that feels increasingly chaotic?
Because this deep dive, this is going to equip you to do just that. One of the big ideas Taleb talks about is that problem of induction. I always find this part super fascinating.
Yeah, this is where he brings in that turkey problem. It's such a vivid image. Imagine a turkey happily fed each and every day, right? After
Yeah.
1,000 days is thinking, hey, life is good. This farmer's got my back. Then comes Thanksgiving. Not such a good day for the turkey anymore.
Ouch, poor turkey. But it really drives home the point that reliance on past experience, it can really blind us to what might be coming. We get comfortable with patterns and then bam, the unexpected hits. Like think about a time you were completely blindsided, maybe by a sudden market crash, or even, on a smaller scale, a surprise party. It makes you wonder why our brains crave those predictable patterns, even when they might not be real.
It's in our wiring,
Hmm.
We crave patterns because, well, they make us feel safe, protected. But that feeling of safety, it can be dangerous. It can make us oblivious to those black swans lurking just outside our vision.
Which is where Taleb's idea of mediocristan and extremistan comes in so handy, right? I think this is going to be a real aha moment for you listening in.
So think of mediocristan as the land of averages, like human height. You've got short folks, tall folks, but most cluster around the middle. No single person's height is going to drastically change that average. It's a bell curve world.
But then you've got extremistan, where things get a little wild, right?
Exactly. In Extremistan, one single event can totally dominate the picture. Take book sales, for instance. One book can sell millions of copies, while tons of others barely get noticed. It's the same with, say, wealth distribution or even those trends on social media. One event, one person, can be a total outlier and skew the entire picture. So think about it. Is your work more like measuring height, where things are pretty predictable? Or is it more like trying to predict book sales, where a black swan could completely change the game? This distinction is going to help you figure out where those hidden risks might be lurking.
And then Taleb throws us another curveball, the narrative fallacy. We all love a good story, right?
We do. But
Right.
the problem is we crave those stories so much that we force them onto events, even when the story oversimplifies what really happened. We want things to make sense, so we connect dots that might not actually belong together. Think about how the news reports. Events, they're often packaged into these neat narratives, but reality is way messier than that.
It's true. And then there's this thing called retrospective distortion. Hindsight, it makes everything seem so much clearer, right? After a market crash, suddenly everyone's an expert on what should have been done. But were those signs really that obvious back then? It all feels so clear in the rearview mirror, but it's often just an illusion. And this gets you thinking about those almost moments in history. Cities that narrowly escaped a disaster, companies that were this close to making it big, but didn't quite get there.
That's the realm of silent evidence, one of Taleb's most powerful ideas. What we don't see is just as crucial as what we do see. He uses the example of Giacomo Casanova, a notorious gambler and risk-taker who managed to escape every dangerous situation. Did that mean he was a genius at avoiding risk? Or was he just incredibly lucky?
It's like surviving a car crash unscathed, right? Doesn't necessarily make you a fantastic driver, it just means you got lucky that one time. And the danger is we overestimate our own skills and totally underestimate the role of pure chance. Which brings us to another fascinating concept, the ludic fallacy.
Why do casinos consistently rake in the dough? Because they've got This mastery of understanding randomness, that's why. They know the odds, they know the house always wins in the end. The ludic fallacy is when we think we can apply those neat, predictable rules of a casino game to real life. Real life doesn't play by those rules.
It's like trying to predict the stock market based solely on what happened, like, last week. There are just way too many variables at play.
Exactly. Real life randomness is wild, it's complex. It just doesn't fit into those neat little boxes we try to create. And that's why relying on models that assume predictability well, that can backfire big time.
So we've got to ditch those simplistic models, especially in Extremistan. But then what? How do we operate in a world where these massive unexpected events can pop up anytime?
Well, that's where this concept of anti-fragility that Taleb talks about really comes into play. It's not just about riding out those black swan events, it's about actually becoming stronger because of them.
Hold on, wait. Getting stronger from chaos? How does that even work?
Think about your own body for a second. When you lift weights, really push yourself physically, you're creating stress, right? But that stress is exactly what makes you stronger in the long run. Your body adapts and builds itself up.
So it's kind of like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but like literally. But instead of just surviving, you're using those challenges to like level up, right?
Exactly. And this applies way beyond just our physical selves. Businesses, systems, even our mindsets, they can all be anti-fragile. The trick is building in that capacity to adapt and grow from those shocks.
Okay, so how do we make ourselves more anti-fragile, or even our businesses, for those listening in who that's relevant to? Like, what are the cheat codes here?
One strategy is embracing diversity and redundancy.
Yeah.
Like, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Whether literally or metaphorically. Spread your bets, experiment with different approaches, always have backup plans. That way, if one thing fails, you're not totally wiped out.
So don't just rely on one source of income, one investment strategy, even just one way of thinking about things.
You got it. The more diverse and redundant your systems are, the less likely a single black swan event is going to totally sink you. And this actually leads to another idea from Taleb, the barbell strategy.
A barbell strategy. Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for us.
So picture a barbell, right? It's about balancing those extremes. On one side of the barbell, you're ultra-conservative, protecting yourself from that, like, catastrophic loss. Think of like, your core savings, those non-negotiables. But on the other side, you're taking those calculated risks, things with massive potential upside if they actually hit.
So it's like having that solid base of security, but then also having a part of you that's out there exploring, pushing boundaries, going for those moonshot opportunities.
You got it. It's about balancing that need for security with the potential for, like, truly big growth. It's a really great model for navigating a world where those black swans are basically a given.
No, one thing that's really stayed with me from all of this is that idea of silent evidence. It's kind of spooky when you start to think about it.
It is. It's all that stuff we don't see because it simply didn't happen. All those potential black swans that never materialized, those almost moments in history. It's easy to focus on the winners, the survivors, but what about all the ones that didn't make it?
Right, like those almost inventions that never took off, or the companies that were this close to becoming the next Google but just didn't, makes you question how much of success is actually skill and how much is just plain luck.
And that's the danger of not paying attention to silent evidence, right?
Mm.
We overestimate our brilliance, our own awesomeness, and underestimate how big a role chance actually plays. It's like assuming everyone who plays the lottery has an equal chance of winning. We only see the ones who did win, not the millions who bought tickets and got nothing.
So what's the antidote to this silent evidence blindness? How do we start seeing the stuff that didn't happen?
First off, be skeptical of those neat narratives.
Yeah.
Remember, we're amazing at creating stories that oversimplify reality. Don't just accept the official story at face value. Dig deeper. Look for alternative explanations. Consider the possibility that there might be more to the story than we're being told.
So don't take things at face value, especially those success stories that seem a little too good to be true.
Right. And here's a practical tip. Pay attention to base rates. A base rate is that underlying probability of something happening, regardless of the specifics. For example, the base rate for a startup failing. Super high, even if the idea seems incredible. So don't get caught up in the hype. Ground your decisions in a realistic understanding of how often things actually work out or don't.
So instead of just focusing on one individual story, zoom out and look at the bigger picture. If we're talking about startups, look at the overall success rate, right? Don't let one unicorn blind you to the less glamorous reality.
Exactly. And this leads to another important point. Be wary of predictions, especially when it comes to those really complex systems.
Yeah, I have a feeling Taleb is not a fan of those crystal ball gazers.
He's not. Our track record for predicting the future, especially those big, impactful events, is pretty dismal, to be honest.
So all those economists and political pundits who are always making those bold predictions about what's going to happen next year or even next month, we should take their pronouncements with a grain of salt. Maybe a whole shaver.
Exactly. Remember, we live in a world that's increasingly complex and interconnected. Small changes can trigger those huge, unexpected consequences.
It's like that butterfly effect idea, right?
Hmm.
A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and somehow it causes a hurricane in Florida. Crazy.
Right, the more complex the system, the harder it is to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to predict the future, what's a more effective approach?
Okay, if we can't rely on predictions, how do we operate in a world that's inherently unpredictable? What's the alternative?
Focus on building robustness and resilience into your systems, your strategies, your entire approach.
So instead of trying to predict those specific punches that are coming, it's more about being able to roll with the punches, no matter where they come from.
That's it. It's about building systems that can adapt and evolve rather than trying to control every single outcome. It's about getting comfortable with uncertainty rather than fearing it.
I like that, getting comfortable with uncertainty. It sounds kind of paradoxical, but in a world of black swans, it makes perfect sense. We have to accept that we can't know everything.
Right. And it's not about giving up on planning or making decisions altogether. It's about shifting our focus from trying to be right all the time to trying to be robust.
So having a plan, but also being willing to adjust that plan as needed based on what actually happens in the real
Right.
world.
Precisely. And it's about building in that margin of safety we talked about earlier.
Right, that buffer that helps you absorb those unexpected shocks.
Mhm.
And we touched on this earlier, but Taleb also has this idea of a barbell approach to risk, right? What's that all about?
So picture a barbell again. It's about balancing those extremes. On one side, you're ultra risk averse, protecting yourself from a catastrophic loss. Your core savings, those essentials.
Got it. So that's like the safe bet side of the barbell.
Exactly. But then on the other side, you're taking those calculated risks, things with massive potential upside if they pan out.
The high risk, high reward side. So it's like having that solid base of security, but then also a part of you that's out there exploring, pushing boundaries, going for those moonshot opportunities.
You nailed it. It's a great model for navigating a world where those black swans are a given.
This barbell strategy, it's really interesting. I can see how it could apply to so many different areas of life, but it seems like it requires a certain level of self-awareness and discipline to really balance those two extremes effectively.
You're absolutely right. It's not about being reckless. It's about being strategic and intentional with your risk-taking and having a clear understanding of your own values and goals so you can make choices that align with what's truly important to you.
So it's not just about applying a formula or following a set of rules blindly. It's about developing that deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you, and then using that understanding to make decisions that are wise but also courageous.
Exactly. And that's what makes exploring these black swan ideas so valuable, right? It's not just about learning some abstract concepts. It's about developing a more nuanced and sophisticated approach to life in a world that's, well, it's increasingly unpredictable and full of surprises.
And in a world like that, being able to adapt, evolve, and even thrive in the face of the unexpected, that's an incredibly valuable skill.
One thing Taleb points out is how often we try to apply models and concepts that work perfectly fine in some areas to situations where they just don't belong. He's especially critical of the overuse of that Gaussian bell curve.
Yeah, like assuming that everything follows that neat bell-shaped distribution, even when in reality it doesn't.
Right. The bell curve works great for describing things like height or weight in a population, but when you try to apply it to, say, stock market returns or the impact of new technologies, it just breaks down. Those are areas where those extreme events, those black swans, can have a really disproportionate impact. The bell curve just doesn't capture that.
So using the bell curve in those situations, it can actually give us a false sense of security and make us underestimate the potential for those really big, impactful events.
Exactly. It creates this illusion of predictability where Frankly, it doesn't belong. And this is where Taleb's concept of fractals and what he calls Mandelbrottian randomness
Mm.
gets really interesting.
Okay, fractals, Mandelbrottian randomness. You mentioned these before. They're one of those concepts that can make your head spin a little bit.
It can be mind-bending, but it's worth the effort to understand, I promise. So fractals are these fascinating geometric shapes that have this property of self-similarity across different scales. Remember that coastline example you mentioned? The closer you zoom in, the more those little details resemble the overall shape of the coastline.
Right, right. It's like a pattern that repeats itself, but at different levels of magnification.
Exactly. And Mandelbrot, the mathematician who really popularized fractals, showed that these patterns are literally everywhere in nature, from trees to galaxies.
Okay, so how does this connect to randomness and black swans? I'm trying to see how these seemingly unrelated things fit together.
What's fascinating is that Mandelbrottian randomness suggests that even events that seem random, chaotic, might actually have an underlying structure, a hidden order within that chaos. And this structure can help us understand and even, to some degree, anticipate those extreme events, those black
So
swans.
it's not just about saying that anything is possible, right? It's about looking for those patterns and structures within randomness that can give us clues about what's more likely to happen.
Exactly. And this is crucial because it helps us shift those unknown unknowns, the things we can't even imagine, into known unknowns, things we know we don't know, but at least we can account for the fact that they might happen.
So instead of being totally blindsided by a black swan, we can at least be aware that they're out there, lurking, and start to think about how to prepare for them.
Precisely. And that's a much more empowering position to be in than just hoping for the best and assuming that the future is going to be a smooth continuation of the past.
This whole concept of fractals and Mandelbrottian randomness is pretty mind-blowing. I think this is something our listener will want to dig into further. It really challenges those assumptions about how randomness works and how we can navigate a world full of unexpected events.
It does. It reminds us that even in a world of uncertainty, there are patterns, there are structures that we can learn to recognize and, use to our advantage. But recognizing those patterns also requires us to be aware of how our own emotions can influence our judgment, especially when dealing with risk and uncertainty. Taleb talks about this a lot.
Oh, absolutely. It's like when the market takes a sudden dip and everyone panics and starts selling, even though historically those dips have often been great buying opportunities. Or on the flip side, when everyone's super optimistic and piling into the latest hot investment, that can be a sign that the market's overheating and a correction's coming.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to respond to immediate threats and rewards. That can sometimes lead us to make decisions that aren't in our best long-term interest.
So, how do we avoid letting our emotions get the better of us in those situations? How do we stay cool under pressure?
One key is developing a strong sense of self-awareness. Pay attention to your emotional responses in different situations, and notice how those emotions might be coloring your thinking, your decision-making.
Basically, take a step back, breathe, and try to assess the situation objectively rather than letting your emotions call the shots.
Exactly. And another key is developing a set of principles, or even just rules of thumb, that you can rely on when those tough decisions come up. This could be anything from a personal investment philosophy to like a set of ethical guidelines that you hold yourself to.
So, having that clear framework in place, it can help you make more rational and informed decisions, even when your emotions are going haywire.
You got it. And it can help you avoid making the same mistakes over and over again.
One of the things that really resonates with me from Taleb's work is this concept of skin in the game. It's a simple idea, but with some pretty profound implications.
I agree it does. Skin in the game basically means having a personal stake in the outcome of your decisions. It means being accountable for the consequences, good or bad.
So it's not just talking the talk, it's about walking the walk, right? It's about having something to lose, which makes you think twice before making a risky decision.
Precisely. And Taleb argues that this is crucial for making sound judgments, especially in situations involving risk and uncertainty. Because when you have skin in the game, you're much more likely to think carefully about the potential consequences of your actions, and you're a lot less likely to take unnecessary risks.
It's like the difference between a financial advisor who invests their own money in the same products they recommend to their clients versus one who just collects a fee, regardless of how those investments perform.
That's a perfect example. When someone has skin in the game, their incentives are aligned with yours. They're much more likely to act in your best interest.
Okay, so how can we apply this principle of skin in the game to our own lives? Are there specific things we can do to make sure we're not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk?
One way is to be a lot more selective about who we trust and who we listen to. Don't just take advice from anyone who calls themselves an expert, especially if they don't have any skin in the game themselves.
So look for people who have a track record of success, but also look for people who are willing to be accountable for their decisions, for the advice they give.
Exactly. And another way to apply this principle is to be more willing to take ownership of our own choices and the consequences that come with them.
So don't just blame others when things go wrong, but also be willing to take credit when things go right. Own the whole spectrum of outcomes, not just the ones that make us look good.
Exactly. It's about developing a sense of personal responsibility, accountability for those choices that we make. And it's about recognizing that in a world of black swans, we're all ultimately responsible for navigating the uncertainty and managing those risks that come with it.
This whole idea of skin in the game, it's so relevant, not just for us as individuals, but for organizations and systems as well. If the people making the decisions aren't the ones who are actually going to bear the consequences, well, we're setting ourselves up for some potentially disastrous outcomes.
You're absolutely right. It's something we need to be thinking about more and more these days, where the stakes are so high and the potential consequences of our decisions can be far-reaching.
Now, Taleb also has some pretty strong critiques of traditional education and how it prepares us, or doesn't prepare us, for a world of black swans. What are some of his main concerns there?
He argues that traditional education often puts way too much emphasis on theory and abstract knowledge while neglecting those practical skills and mindsets you actually need to navigate a world of uncertainty and complexity.
So it's like we're being taught how to play a game with a fixed set of rules, but then we get out into the real world and realize that the rule book's been thrown out the window, that the rules are constantly changing and there are no clear-cut answers.
That's a fantastic analogy. And he's also critical of the heavy focus on specialization. He argues that in a world of black swans, it's much more important to have a broad base of knowledge and skills to be able to adapt to those changing circumstances.
So instead of being a master of one trade, it's better to be a jack of all trades, or at least have a more diverse set of tools in your toolbox.
Exactly. And it's not just about the specific knowledge and skills we acquire. It's also about how we think, how we approach problems.
So instead of being taught what to think, we should be taught how to think.
Precisely. That means developing those critical thinking skills, being able to question assumptions, being open to new information, new perspectives.
It's about being able to think for ourselves rather than just blindly accepting what we're told.
That's right. And that's a skill that's essential for navigating a world where black swans are always a possibility.
This whole discussion about education is really thought-provoking. It makes you wonder if the way we're educating students is really equipping them for the challenges of the 21st century, where things are changing so rapidly and the future is so uncertain.
It's a vital question to be asking, and it's one that, thankfully, more and more educators and policymakers are starting to grapple with.
Because if we're not equipping students with the tools and the mindsets they need to thrive in a world of black swans, well, we're not really doing them any favors.
Absolutely. And it's not just about changing the curriculum or adding new courses, right? It's about fostering a culture of intellectual curiosity, critical thinking, and adaptability in the classroom and beyond.
So, creating an environment where students are encouraged to question, to explore, and to embrace the unknown.
Precisely. And that's an approach that can benefit not just students, but society as a whole. Now, this next point might seem counterintuitive, but Taleb argues that in some instances, not knowing can actually be an advantage.
Wait, not knowing as an advantage. Explain that one. It seems like we're always pushing ourselves to learn more, become experts in our fields.
Yeah, it is counterintuitive, isn't it? But he's saying that in a world of black swans where the future is unpredictable, being too attached to our knowledge and our predictions can actually blind us to new possibilities and opportunities.
So sometimes it's better to be a beginner, to approach things with a sense of openness and curiosity, rather than assuming that we already know everything.
Exactly. There's that Zen proverb. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. When we're too set in our ways, too attached to our expertise, we tend to filter out information that doesn't fit our existing models and beliefs. We might miss out on breakthroughs because we're too focused on what we think we know.
It's almost like we need to unlearn some things in order to learn new things.
In a way, yes. It's about being willing to let go of those preconceived notions and being open to new information and new ways of thinking.
And that ties into the idea of intellectual humility, right? Being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers, being open to being wrong.
Exactly. Intellectual humility is recognizing the limits of our knowledge and being open to that possibility that we might be wrong. It's not about being stupid or ignorant. It's about being realistic about what we do and don't know.
So it's about being a lifelong learner, always seeking out new knowledge, and always being willing to challenge your own assumptions.
That's it. And in a world of black swans, that kind of humility can be a real asset. It allows us to be more flexible, adaptable, more open to those unexpected opportunities that might come knocking.
This idea of intellectual humility, it's so powerful. It's almost like a superpower in a world where things are changing so rapidly and the future is so uncertain.
I agree. It's something that we can all cultivate no matter our background or expertise. It's about being curious, being willing to learn, and being open to changing our minds when presented with new information.
It sounds like it's about embracing the journey rather than being fixated on the destination.
That's beautifully put. And it's a mindset that can help us not just survive, but thrive in a world full of black swans.
You know, another key point Taleb brings up is this difference between noise and signal. With all the information overload we're dealing with today, this seems more relevant than ever.
Oh, it's incredibly relevant. We're drowning in information news, social media, opinions coming at us from all directions. Taleb uses this analogy of a haystack with just a few needles hidden inside. The hay is the noise, all that irrelevant stuff, the distractions, the things that don't really matter.
And the needles are the signal, the valuable insights, the key trends, the things that can actually help us make better decisions.
You got it. And the
Yeah.
problem is the haystack keeps getting bigger and bigger while those needles are getting harder and harder to find.
It's like we're trying to drink from a fire hose, but most of what's coming out is just water, not the valuable stuff we need.
Exactly. And that's where developing a strong filter becomes so important.
A filter, what do you mean by that?
A filter is essentially a set of criteria or principles you use to decide what information deserves your attention and what you can safely ignore.
So it's like having a mental spam filter for your brain, something that helps you block out all the noise and focus on what really matters.
Perfect analogy. And developing a good filter is essential for navigating this world of information overload.
Okay, so how do we develop this filter? Give us the step-by-step guide.
The first step is getting clear about your goals, your priorities. What are you trying to achieve? What information is actually relevant to those goals? If you're trying to build a successful business, you probably shouldn't be spending hours scrolling through social media or watching reality TV.
Right. Focus on the stuff that moves the needle for you.
Absolutely. Another key is to be skeptical of sources that have a vested interest in promoting a particular agenda or point of view. Be wary of anyone who's trying to sell you something, whether it's a product, a service, or even an idea.
Always ask yourself, what's their angle? Why are they telling me this?
Exactly. And then be mindful of how the information is being presented to you. The media loves to use those sensational headlines and dramatic visuals to grab our attention, even if the underlying story isn't really all that important.
So don't just react to the headlines or the emotional triggers. Step back and try to assess the information objectively.
Right. Be wary of information that's presented in a way that's designed to, manipulate your emotions or play on your biases.
So it's about becoming a more discerning consumer of information,
Yeah.
being more selective about what we let into our minds, what we choose to focus on.
Exactly. In a world of information overload, we have to be more active, more intentional about what we choose to consume. It's not just about absorbing information. It's about filtering it, evaluating it, synthesizing it in a way that helps us make better decisions.
I really appreciate this discussion about filtering out the noise. It's such a crucial skill in today's world, and it's a great reminder that we have more control over our information intake than we often realize.
We do. And that control is essential for protecting our mental bandwidth, making sure we're focusing on the stuff that truly matters.
You know, something else that really struck me in Taleb's book was his discussion of the role of randomness in success. He makes the case that we tend to overestimate the role of skill and underestimate the role of luck, which is a humbling thought, to say the least.
It is humbling, isn't it? We look at successful people and assume they must be incredibly talented, incredibly hardworking, without considering the role that, pure chance might have played in their journey.
It's like that saying, it's better to be lucky than good. Or maybe it's more accurate to say it's a combination of both.
It's definitely a combination. But the point is, we shouldn't assume that success is always a direct result of skill and hard work. There are a lot of factors outside our control that can influence outcomes.
So it's not that skill and hard work don't matter, but we shouldn't get arrogant and think we're completely in control of our own destiny.
Right. And this is especially true in fields that Taleb calls extremistan, areas where a single event or a small number of events can have a truly outsized impact.
So like the world of investing, where a single market crash can wipe out years of gains. Or entrepreneurship, where a single product launch can make or break a company.
Precisely. There's a lot of randomness baked into those fields, and even the most skilled, most experienced people can get lucky or unlucky.
So it's about having a more balanced and realistic view of success and failure, recognizing that there's an element of chance involved, no matter how hard we work or how talented we are.
You got it. And it's about not getting too discouraged when things don't go our way and not getting too carried away when they do, because a lot of it comes down to factors that are simply outside our control.
Okay, so if we accept that randomness does play a role, what can we do to increase our chances of success? How do we stack the odds in our favor, even in a world where we can't control everything?
One of the most effective things we can do is focus on process over outcomes.
What does it mean, practically speaking?
It means focusing on the things you can control.
Yeah.
Your effort, your preparation, your decision-making process. Instead of getting fixated on the results, which, as we've been talking about, are often influenced by factors outside your control.
So it's about consistently doing the right things rather than obsessing over whether you're getting the results you want right away.
Exactly. Because over time, if you keep focusing on doing those right things, the results tend to take care of themselves. It's about playing the long game, not getting caught up in those short-term fluctuations.
It's like building good habits, systems that support you in the long run, rather than trying to micromanage every outcome.
That's a great way to put it. Another key is to be willing to experiment and learn from your mistakes along the way.
So don't be afraid to try new things, even if you're not sure they'll work out.
Exactly. You never know what might lead to a breakthrough or a new opportunity. And if something doesn't work, view it as a learning experience, not a failure.
It's about embracing the journey rather than being fixated on reaching a specific destination.
I love that. Because in a world of black swans, the journey often is more important than the destination.
It's about being open to those new experiences, new perspectives, new ways of doing things, even if it means stepping outside that comfort zone sometimes.
It does. And it's about recognizing that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of the process.
Taleb also talks about the importance of having a margin of safety in our decision-making. What does that mean exactly, and how can we apply that in our own lives?
A margin of safety is basically a buffer that you build into your plans to account for, well, for the unexpected. Like having that financial cushion to fall back on if you lose your job, or having extra time built into your schedule in case of delays.
So it's like anticipating potential problems and having a plan B in place to deal with them. It's about not assuming that everything is going to go perfectly according to plan because, well, let's face it, it rarely does.
Exactly. And it's about being a little bit conservative in your estimates and projections, rather than assuming you're going to get the highest possible return on your investment or that your project will be completed in the shortest possible time frame.
So instead of being overly optimistic, you build in some wiggle room to account for the possibility that things might not go as smoothly as you hope.
Precisely. Because in a world of black swans, things rarely go exactly as planned. Having that margin of safety can help you weather the storms and come out stronger on the other side.
I love this idea of a margin of safety. It's so practical and it makes so much sense. It's almost like having a safety net that you can rely on when inevitably something unexpected happens.
It is like a safety net.
Right.
And it's something we can apply to every area of our lives, from our finances to our health to our relationships.
So, for example, if you're planning a big trip, you might build in some extra time just in case your flight gets delayed, or you might pack some extra clothes in case your luggage gets lost.
Great example. Or if you're starting a business, maybe you have some extra capital set aside in case your initial sales projections are a little off.
It's about being prepared for the unexpected and not letting those unexpected events totally derail your plans.
Exactly. And it's a mindset that can make a huge difference in our ability to navigate a world where those black swans are lurking around every corner.
This concept of a margin of safety, it's really empowering. It's not about being pessimistic or expecting the worst to happen. It's about being realistic, being prepared, and recognizing that in a world where black swan events are a constant possibility, a little bit of caution can go a long way.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about having the wisdom to acknowledge the limits of what we know and the humility to prepare for the unexpected.
Now, we've talked about being prepared for the unexpected, but what about actually creating opportunities out of that uncertainty? Taleb introduces this concept of optionality as a way to do just that. What's optionality all about?
Optionality is all about creating choices, keeping your options open. It's about not locking yourself into one specific path, but leaving yourself room to maneuver and adapt as circumstances change.
So it's like having a plan B or even a plan C in case your original plan goes sideways.
That's definitely part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also about being open to those new opportunities that might pop up, even if they weren't part of your initial plan.
So being flexible and adaptable rather than rigid and inflexible. In a world that's constantly changing, it sounds like optionality is a must-have.
It is, especially in a world of black swans. That kind of flexibility, it can be a huge advantage because it lets you respond effectively to unexpected events and even capitalize on those events to create new opportunities.
Okay, I get it. But can you give us some real-world examples of what this optionality thing might look like in practice?
Sure. Imagine an entrepreneur who starts a business that could be easily pivoted or adapted to different markets, different customer needs, or an investor who diversifies their portfolio across different asset classes, so they're not too exposed to any one particular risk.
So it's about having a range of choices available, right? Rather than putting all your eggs in one basket, having multiple paths forward.
You got it.
Ah.
And it's a principle that applies to every area of our lives, from our careers to our relationships, even our personal finances.
This whole idea of optionality is really intriguing. It's almost like having a secret weapon in a world that's so unpredictable, so full of surprises.
It is, because it allows us to be more proactive, to shape our...
So it's about having a range of choices available, right? Rather than putting all your eggs in one basket, having multiple paths forward.
Exactly. You got it. And it's a principle that applies to every area of our lives, from our careers to our relationships, even our personal finances.
This whole idea of optionality is really intriguing. It's almost like having a secret weapon in a world that's so unpredictable, so full of surprises.
It is, because it allows us to be more proactive, to shape our own destinies, rather than being at the mercy of fate.
So it's not just about reacting to what happens, it's about creating the conditions for success, even in a world where we can't predict the future.
You've got it. And that brings us to another important point that Taleb emphasizes, the narrative fallacy. He's talking about our tendency to create stories and explanations that make the world seem more orderly and predictable than it really is.
So it's like we're telling ourselves fairy tales to make ourselves feel better about the fact that we don't really have as much control as we'd like to think.
It's exactly like that. We humans, we have this deep-seated need to make sense of the world around us, and one way we do that is by creating narratives, stories that connect events and provide explanations. But the problem is, sometimes those stories, they oversimplify things.
So we create a story, even if it's not necessarily accurate or complete. We want things to make sense, so we fill in the gaps with our own assumptions and biases.
That's precisely it. And the danger is that these stories, they can actually blind us to the true complexity and randomness of the world. We try to impose order and meaning on events, even when those events might be largely driven by chance.
So it's like we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We're forcing reality to conform to our neat and tidy narratives, even if those narratives don't reflect how the world really works.
What a great analogy. And this is dangerous because it can lead us to make bad decisions because we're operating under this false sense of understanding and predictability.
So for example, if we believe that the stock market always goes up over the long term, we might be more likely to take on more risk than we should because we're ignoring the possibility of a black swan event, something that could wipe out our savings.
That's a perfect example. Or, say, if we believe that a certain political party always has the best interests of the people at heart, we might be more likely to vote for that party, even if their policies are actually harmful. We get so caught up in the story, we miss the facts.
So how do we avoid falling prey to this narrative fallacy? How do we break free from those comfortable stories and really face reality head on?
Well, it takes conscious effort, for sure. First, just being aware of your own biases, your tendency to seek out information that confirms what you already believe. That's huge.
So don't just read the news sources or listen to the experts that you already agree with, right? Seek out alternative perspectives, even if they're a little uncomfortable. Challenge your own assumptions.
Absolutely, that's key. And another thing, focus on data and evidence rather than just stories and anecdotes.
So don't just accept what you're told, right? Look at the numbers, do your own research, try to really understand those underlying trends and patterns. Don't let the narrative hijack your thinking.
Exactly, because the data can often tell a very different story than the narrative.
This whole discussion of the narrative fallacy has been really insightful. It makes you realize how much our perception of the world is shaped by the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that we're told by others. And it's a good reminder to be more critical of those stories, to always be on the lookout for evidence that either supports or contradicts them.
It is a powerful reminder. In a world of black swans, the truth is often much more complex and nuanced than any single narrative can capture.
It seems like one of the key takeaways from all of this is that we need to develop a more robust and resilient approach to life. The world is just too unpredictable to assume we can control or predict everything.
That's exactly right. It's not about trying to control or predict the future. It's about being prepared for a wider range of possibilities and being able to adapt to whatever comes our way.
So instead of trying to avoid risk altogether, which is impossible anyway, we should be focusing on managing risk, building those systems and strategies that can handle those black swan events when they inevitably happen.
Precisely. It's about moving away from that illusion of control and really embracing the reality of uncertainty.
It's about getting more comfortable with not knowing, being able to navigate the unknown with confidence and resilience.
You've really captured the essence of it. And it's a mindset that can help us not just survive, but thrive in a world of black swans.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, and this deep dive into the world of black swans has been incredibly insightful. Of all the things we've discussed, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will walk away with?
If I had to choose just one, it would be this. Embrace the reality of uncertainty. Develop a mindset, a set of strategies that allow you to not just withstand, but to actually benefit from the inevitable surprises and disruptions that life is going to throw at you.
So don't be afraid of the black swans. Embrace them. See them as an opportunity to learn, to grow, to become even stronger and more resilient.
That's a fantastic way to put it. And remember, as Taleb says, the black swan might just be an opportunity in disguise.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, listener. Until next time, be anti-fragile.